Now we're going to do really an open session with myself and Amol. Amol Deshpande is FBN's founder, CEO since the beginning. And we have been building FBN over the last 8 years. We have a lot of different experiences to talk to you about. This is meant to be an open session as well. We're going to do some Q&A about what entrepreneurship is like, especially from Amol's perspective as the CEO, and as all of you, as farmers and entrepreneurs yourselves. We'll talk a little bit about life in Silicon Valley as we started. We no longer live in Silicon Valley. We are a national and now global company. But I think this is a great chance. If you have any questions, feel free. We'll open it up probably midway through and pop up to the mics, and you can ask us questions about FBN or the entrepreneurial experience. So please welcome Amol Deshpande.
Thanks.
Welcome back
Thanks,
to
Charles.
Farmer.
I appreciate it. I just want to, before we start, you can see Charles and I have very different personalities. And Charles is, you look at his shirt, he's dressed like he works at Chili's. Look at the flair and everything over here. Me, I'm just grumpy all the time and sarcastic. So we'll try to make it as interesting as possible. And please leave a lot of time or ask any questions. I don't know how the format is, but I love questions. And any question is fair game about entrepreneurship or FBN or whatever. So.
Okay. Well, I think, first thing, Amol, is I think tell us about your story, your personal story. What made you want to be an entrepreneur? Amol has a long history of starting companies, investing in companies. Yeah. What made you want to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, I mean, my parents, I didn't grow up on a farm or anything, as you might tell by looking at me, although, my parents are immigrants, and my father came to the U.S. as an engineer, and at a time where there was a lot of need for technical talent in the United States. It was the 60s and 70s, and he immigrated. And, I was born in Chicago, and I got an engineering degree as an undergrad, and I think as I was getting my education and afterwards, even though I love technical things, I didn't see that as a future or career for me. I was okay at it. I think I would say I was pretty good at it, but I wasn't exceptional. And when I meet like our engineers at FBN and whatnot, they're exceptional at that. But I felt like I wanted to build things. The major thing is I felt like I wanted to take some risk. And that is a mentality that, I don't know how you acquire it or what happens, but for me, a stable career or a career where I took a job somewhere and worked for 15 years, that wasn't going to work for me. So I asked my dad he's the only person I really knew at the time, for an introduction. And when I was in grad school, he introduced me to a guy who had started an indoor fish farm. So I was an engineer. I knew nothing about agriculture, but I went to work on this fish farm, this livestock operation, and I thought I was going to hate it. I mean, I thought this has got to be, I knew nothing about this stuff. This is 20 plus years ago. And I actually loved it. I loved working with the livestock. I liked buying the feed. I liked the analytics. I liked the technology behind it. And it just sort of spurred an interest in a sector and a segment that has become a lifelong pursuit. And I just thought to myself, I can probably spend the next 50 years working in agriculture and not learn a fraction of everything that there is. And I just intellectually enjoyed it. So that's how I started. And then since then, started companies and was an investor for a period of time. And then 8 years ago, I just felt like still young enough to go start a business that could be transformative. And of course, I wanted that to be in the ag sector. I found Charles and many others and launched FBN.
Let's see. There's many places to start. Actually, I'll probably jump in a little ahead to sort of the entrepreneurial mindset when you're in both the startup seat and then the CEO's seat.
Yeah.
And Amol has an expression: things are never as good or as bad as they seem. How would you apply that to the business on the farm, or how does that apply into the business on the company?
Well, I think it applies to everything in life.
Right.
I mean, I tell employees some axioms. We can go through all of them, but they seem repetitive to people who hear them all the time, but I repeat them to myself. So one good one is, Charles just mentioned, is things are never as good or bad as they seem. So you start a company, and things are great. because you probably got some money or you wrote a business plan and you're super excited about your idea. So things just seem terrific. It's going to be a multi-billion-dollar business. You're going to be rich and famous, and all this great stuff's going to happen. Then you get a dose of harsh reality. You try to release a product. You try to get past a technical barrier. You try to impress a customer, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And suddenly things seem awful. And then you figure it out. And suddenly you get a lot of customers. And things seem great again. And then you realize that scaling that up is really hard, and you're losing money, and it's tough, and you can't hire enough people, and things seem hard again. You can go through that roller coaster. That is an option for you emotionally, right? And some people are equipped to do that. But actually the way through it is to remind yourself that those ups and downs, things are never as good or bad as they actually seem at the time, right? Starting that company is exciting, but there's a lot of work ahead. Failing on that first technical product really, really sucks, but you can iterate it.
Right.
And in fact, you can learn from it if you want to, and it's all in the head.
Right.
It is 100% in the head. It's the mentality and it's the approach you take to it. As far as on the farm, I see it the same way. I've been learning about farming for 20 years, and I've visited with all kinds of farmers, and I would say that you go through that cycle every year.
Right.
Commodity price, staring at the screen of the commodity price is one example, but also staring at the weather is another one. So how are you going to approach it, right? Is it emotional? Is it an up and a down, or is it business?
Right.
Right? Is it business, and do I approach it in a rational way, a data-driven way? And so it's not easy because it's just human nature to get excited, and it's definitely human nature to get depressed or get upset. But I don't think it's helpful, and I definitely don't think it's helpful in entrepreneurship. It's 100%. However you feel at that time, it's never as good or bad as you think.
Right.
Whether you're a big, growing business, tech business like us, if you're a small business, if you're a publicly traded company, it doesn't matter. Same thing.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one of the, you go through so many cycles. You can have good weeks, good days, bad days, good hours. It can be minute by minute. And it's always very helpful to kind of check.
On balance, it's mostly bad days. I just like to point out, I actually would tell you that if I had to weigh it out, it's mostly bad days. And if I had to if I reflect on my day, if I go home and I say, okay, well, let me just go through the list of things that happened today. The emails that I got, the text messages, the phone calls, the things that were written, the things that were said, I could drive myself nuts. And but anybody could. You don't have to be the CEO of a company to feel that way.
Yeah.
Right. In your own personal life too. I feel like there's enough things going on that you could drive yourself nuts, and you just have you got to get to a point where you can filter it and say okay, well, this happened, and I'm going to deal with it. This is really exciting, but I'm not going to get too excited.
Right
now. And that's mental.
Yeah, the trap. Yeah, there can be, on equal sides, when things can be going really well, then as Jocko talked about, you can get complacent, and complacency can be your worst enemy because you have to take the threats that are the real factors that exist, to the company or the business in other ways, just as.
And I'm really excited right now, but you don't see me putting flair on my shirt, do you?
That's a compliment.
I was saying, maybe I should, stitch on a bunch of stuff over here, but look.
You didn't do the Farmer Olympics.
Maybe one other point on this is one of the things I appreciate about Charles and about a lot of our team members is that it's a lot easier to, I could say these things, but one of the things that allows you to be that way, whether it's from a leadership perspective or entrepreneurship, is that you have people who have those personal characteristics that make you better, right? They have the energy and the enthusiasm and the intellect like Charles does. Some of my technical team who literally, we have some of the best engineers in Silicon Valley. They're here setting up the booth. That, for me, it makes my job kind of easy. I can just say a bunch of stuff and walk around. That's basically what I do. That's one of the secrets of being a CEO, that you don't actually do any work. People don't know this. They act like they're really busy, CEO. They'll show you their calendar, and they're like, oh, look at my calendar. I got all these meetings. I don't believe you. I actually am not that busy. I have things to do. I have a lot of things to think about, but it's not that busy. I have time. I have time to talk to my customers. I have time to reflect on things that happened. I have time to talk to my employees. Why? Because you know, if you can surround yourself with and attract great people, then it makes your life easier. And again, that's true of everything, in my opinion. And you know what? You're not going to, just one other thing, you're not going to attract really good people and talented and very fine people if you're a greedy person, if you're a neurotic person, if you're selfish. You know, those are not characteristics that people want to work with.
Right.
And, you know, and again, some of those are innate. They're human nature for just about anybody, so you have to fight them. You have to fight them. You have to fight it. And if you're not willing to give credit, if you're not willing to share the wealth, good luck.
Right.
You better be really, really brilliant if that's your mentality towards things.
Right. Maybe, Amol, you know, talk about, okay, so through FBN's history, we started, you know, in California, but our first office was actually in Davenport, Iowa. Our very first office, Matt Herman and Cody Beck. Some of our team is still here. Eric Scott.
Eric Wettig.
Eric Wettig. You know, Bob Scott was here as well.
Yeah. Eric Scott, yeah.
And in a lot of the early days of FBN, it could be very difficult for people to want to join or kind of work for the company because, you know, who are we? No one knows what we're doing. We're sitting in Silicon Valley, and here's and farming's a world away. What do you think it is that brought people? Why do you think people want to work at FBN or have come to work for FBN?
Well, I'll answer it. I just have to tell you something funny first, though. When we were looking for our first office in San Carlos in California, we had three options. One was a warehouse. One was a kind of a fancy office that somebody had vacated in Redwood City, and one was a former nail salon next to a gun shop, next to a Jack in the Box.
Right. In between the Jack in the Box and the gun shop.
I wanted the one that was near the Jack in the Box because I thought it would help recruiting.
Right.
And Charles, his view was very different, and they actually had to do an intervention with me and say, "Well, look, you know, I know you like that office, but we're gonna find a middle ground on this." I think at the early stage, you know, getting people to be interested at the early stage, it 100% revolves around two things. One is the mission of the business and what you aspire to do, and are you authentic about it? And number two, who are the other people involved? Right. Okay, it's like, think of it like working a shift at Subway, right? When you're at Subway, if you work there, if maybe your kids, teenage kids, or you work there when you're a teenager, you usually have one other person you're working with.
Right.
And you're making sandwiches, like that's not gonna be fun. But if the other person you're working with is fun, then you're gonna enjoy it. Right? And that makes the job better. And I would put the early stage of entrepreneurship in that same category. If the people you're there in the trench with are fun, if they're fun to work with, if they're interesting, if they're funny, then you're gonna have fun.
Right.
Like you can actually, this sounds counterintuitive, you can fail and you can have fun doing it.
Right.
You can. It can actually happen. You can say, gosh, that 2 years, I got nothing out of it, you know, financially or otherwise, but I had a great time. And I would try it again. So that's number one, you know, and then number two is the mission of the business. I don't know that anybody should join an early stage business or come anywhere near if they don't believe in the mission. Right. You know, and those are the two things at the early stage. If you look at our employees from Davenport who are still with us, Matt Herman, Eric Scott, and Eric Wettig, and Cody Beck, and those guys.
Right.
I mean, they're all those guys, I think, grew up on farms.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Matt would farm at night and process farmers. He would work at FBN. Farm and then process farmers' data at night.
Yeah,
all night long.
I don't want to embarrass him, but he's here somewhere probably. But I would tell you that you see those things, and those are the substance of how you build a company. Right. They're not trivial. Right. They're not trivial tasks. It's the nature of the people and that camaraderie. That's how you make it work. Right. Those are the only two things that matter. Yeah.
And our next office, we did not get the nail salon above the gun store. But we eventually moved into a strip mall in between a used furniture shop and a children's ballet studio. And we were in the strip mall for a long time, including all the great times when the various task force do.
I didn't like that office because it wasn't near any fast food. Except for Chipotle, which I don't count as fast food.
Right.
And our new office, though, is walking distance to a Taco Bell, a McDonald's, and a Dunkin' Donuts.
Right.
I said, find one other tech company that has that.
Right.
When we go and talk to engineers or recruit people, show me one other where you have that. But, you know, the office itself, and, you know, COVID has put a spin on that.
Right.
Which I wonder about, right? Because obviously we started the company before COVID. It's put a spin on that idea. But, I mean, there are times where going to the office is just, it's fun.
Right.
It's like a joy. It's like you go there and it's fun. And even, like I said, even if it's a bad day, it can be fun. Bad things happen to you or your company, it can be fun.
Yeah, and at that stage when you're in the strip mall and we were in the Northwest Bank Tower in Davenport, and there's nothing to look at as far as the office. The people who come to the company at that phase who don't get turned off by that are the most aligned with the mission. And we would have people come into job interviews and just walk right out the door, say no way, not gonna do this, don't want to work in a strip mall. And then there's other people who would come into the interviews and say, wow, this smells like something fun, and I want to be involved in farming. Maybe they grew up in Illinois and
figuratively smells good.
That's right.
Literally,
we had it got a little rank.
Well, we had our office. I'll tell you, our first CFO, who's still with us, Maria Olide, who's probably still here too. We had that strip mall office. She came in and she joined the company, and it was a pre-revenue company at that time. And she's like a public company CFO quality person, right? Like superstar career, all this stuff. And like 2 weeks or 3 weeks in, she pulls me aside and she says, Amol, the carpet here, I don't think's been cleaned in 8 months. And I was like, I think you're probably right about that. We're watching the costs and everything else. And look, I mean, it's just part of where's the hierarchy of things and what is and again, we have fun with it at FBN, and the people who have been here for a long time. People like the Davenport office, like Charles, like Maria, like others, that's the culture of the business. Yeah. The culture of the business is not, facade. It's not something you write emails or bullet points about.
Yeah, one of the best honors was early on, Senator Bob Kerrey, former senator, had come in to visit our office in San Carlos. Somehow we got connected and was interested. And our office was decorated with furniture. I think our couch cost $100. Our used furniture had come from a bunch of other companies, and he walked in and said, "Who's your decorator?" So, the point was always that the investment of FBN was never in the superficial. The investment was always in the technology, it was in our people, it was in our customers, and our ability to build the company in the right way from the early times. Okay, Amol, maybe one last question, then we can open it up. Strategic, short-term versus long-term thinking. This is one of the hardest things in a startup where everything you go through various cycles of hyper urgency and the need to be thinking very long term. How do you balance those two? How do you think about the short term versus the long term?
Well, it changes the pressure. There's an easy answer to this. You have to think long term, and if you don't, the long term thinking always beats short term thinking. Okay, like 100% of the time. And I can tell you, even in giving off-the-cuff financial advice, I could tell you that if you think over the long term when you invest in the stock market or you invest in something, you're going to come out ahead relative to speculating. Again, it's human nature to speculate because it's just tempting. And you saw that a lot with crypto and a lot of things that popped up with pure speculation. And you see what happens. I mean, there's probably people who made a lot of money with those things. There's people who lost fortunes or lost money they couldn't afford to lose. And that's short-term thinking. And long-term thinking, if you really think and you say over 5 years or 10 years, here's what I want to accomplish in my career, with a company, whatever it is, you can be very right about that. Like, you'd be surprised how closely you can pinpoint what you want to achieve. The thing you can't pinpoint is the path there. The path from day 1 to year 8 or 9 is impossible to pinpoint. But the end point, like where you want to be as a company and what you want to accomplish, you can know that over that period of time. Right. You actually can. And if you're willing to be very long term and say over 20 years, 15, 20 years, you can know even more. You can be certain of what you're saying. Right? I always joke that whenever somebody tells me something that's 12 to 18 months away, that means that they don't know. That's just a period of time in which you can say something, and by the time it either actually happens or doesn't, people will have forgotten they told you, what you said. And so I try not to put things in that perspective. Now, let me give you another perspective. As a company grows, you get pressure to think short term. There's going to be investors. There's going to be people around you that are going to force you to accommodate their needs. as opposed to what is the right thing. So what's the right thing to do in that situation, okay? Very, very clear. And it's a message to anybody who's out there running a company of any kind. You have to think about the organization as a whole, right? You have to have the courage to stay the course and think long term. You cannot acquiesce to short-term mindset. You can't acquiesce to pressure. If you're going to do that, then all of those best laid plans, they go away, right? Your 10-year plan, your 15-year plan is gone. Because somewhere, year 6 or 7, you lost your nerve. Or somebody bullied you or manipulated you into thinking differently. You have to have courage. And that, to me, is the biggest thing, is, going long. I don't think it's natural for most humans, and it does require courage. It requires courage and conviction. And then the third thing it requires is persistence, because, again, along the way, you're just going to get the pressure. Right. Like, things are going to happen. And that goes back to the first thing about you can't overreact to the good, the bad, whatever. You got to just stick with it, right?
It goes back to the mission. It goes back to the clarity of the mission, and having guiding principles throughout that allow you to navigate.
The core principles that you won't compromise.
Right.
And no matter what happens, you're not going to compromise them. Can I point out one other thing before we go? I just want to repeat this because I know we got a lot of employees here too, is that the other thing I always say is that if you're going to do something, okay, you decide to become an entrepreneur or whatever it is you do, the number one thing I tell people to look at is pick something that's hard.
Right.
This is another thing that's not human nature. And I actually use this with my own kids as well, who are 9 and 11, and they grew up in California, so they're like incredibly lazy, right? And I'm trying to teach them how to be better people and how to be successful in life. And to me, that is not the income that they achieve. That's not even the education they achieve. It's none of those things. It's a couple of things. I tell them, like, whatever you do with your life and your career, number one, it has to be something that's beneficial to society. And I can think of a lot of jobs where you make no money that are very beneficial to society. Teacher, a missionary, a military. These are really, really, people would be proud if their kids or their relatives or their loved ones were in these professions. You don't make a lot of money doing those things. Sometimes you risk your life doing them too.
Right.
So that's number one. Number two, it has to be hard to do. Like, you come to me and you tell me, I found a way to make millions of dollars and be very successful, but it was a shortcut and it was an easy way. I'm just not going to be very impressed by that. And again, my kids are 9 and 11 and they're still very lazy, so I got to teach them, but they're going to learn. And you repeat that enough times to yourself or to somebody, then they get it. And it changes your mindset, and you say, I'm going to do this because it's hard.
Yeah.
I'm not going to avoid it because it's hard. I'm not going to neglect it. I'm going to do it because it was difficult. I mean, you think about that statement and it's just counterintuitive. You have to repeat it a lot of times, otherwise it just doesn't sink in.
Right.
And it's human nature to take the shortcuts.
Right.
So that to me is the other, and so I think those simplistic things, right? Don't get too high or too low. Think very long term.
Right.
If you can, don't be bullied out of your positions. And then number three, pick things that are hard to do. You do those things and odds are you'll be successful.
One last thing that I would say, Amol, describe, we talk about this a lot at FBN in terms of the role of FBN in the food system and the role of global agriculture meeting humanity's needs. How you think about that?
Yeah, very important for this our audience here. A lot of people think that because the company was originating in California. By the way, I now live in Colorado, and Charles now lives in Nebraska. Okay. So just so you know, but when we took a look at the food system, we said we don't want to be a part of a food system that caters to the global elite or only the wealthy or to niche trends. And of some of these. Food trends and other things that emerge over time. What we want to be a part of is, the true path to global nutrition, something that helps the poor or the destitute as much as it helps somebody who is wealthy in New York or San Francisco. And so that led to some really, really core principles in our business, which is that we support all farming practices, right? We're not going to say, we don't support modern farming practices because some parts of the world don't like GMO. Right. Or some parts of the world don't like spraying. 70% of our business is chem. And you look at that and you say, that's a position, and that's a long-term conviction. It doesn't mean we're not going to look at technologies that are efficient and opportunities to make more ROI for our customers, but we support our farmer customers, and 95, 99% of the population needs these things. Like, without them, we would have a vastly different food system, and one that's unequitable, and one that doesn't provide for our nation. It's a lot like energy.
Right.
We need all forms of energy. We can't just say we're going to have solar energy and call it a day. We need fossil fuels. We need to keep prices reasonable. And so that's a principle of FBN. Right. I'll tell you, in the world of ESG and other things, that's not a popular position. It's not. And I get to hear about that all the time. But it's our position. And it's the position we're going to stick with, right? That's that long-term thinking and not changing our mentality. And I think our customers and our farmer members have appreciated that, right? The way that we view those things.
Right.
Very important. We want to be a part of the real food system, not the niche food system.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, we will open it up. If there are, I don't know if there's mics. I think there's a handful of mics out there on the spotlights. You could also shout it out because it's that time of day.
I see a few mics. Yeah, we'll take any questions from anybody.
Oh, I see. Is that Caleb over there? It looks like Caleb.
It is.
All right, Caleb Frank.
Caleb Fink from South Dakota. I have two questions, if you don't mind. The first one is just kind of going based off your talk and talking about producers, and I think a lot of the producers in this room, sometimes we get stuck in a rut, right? And the way out of that is through an entrepreneurial mindset. How do you, so this is question one, how do you define entrepreneur?
Oh, right. Great question. Well, I see hundreds of them in this room. Like, you think of an entrepreneur as like they're glamorized on television, right? Zuckerberg, like
Shark Tank.
Shark Tank, or Sam Bankman-Fried, a crypto billionaire. An entrepreneur is somebody who takes principal risk, in my opinion, who wants to create, who wants to innovate. And I look at all 50,000 plus of our farmer members as entrepreneurs. I don't think there's really that much difference between that mentality. Now, there's some things in terms of the day-to-day and the business that are different for me than they might be for you. But in terms of that mindset and those core principles, I think they're actually very similar, right? And getting out of the rut also means getting outside your comfort zone. And I think it is easy, if you're in the country and elsewhere, to be in a comfort zone. It's easy for me to be in a comfort zone too. And I got to challenge myself. This is why I travel when I can. I want to talk to people, and that's a way to get out of it. But I define entrepreneurship as broad. And I define it by the personal characteristics of the people who propagate it, not by the size of the company, the amount of money that was raised. That's not the defining characteristic of an entrepreneur. And part of the reason I like working with farmers is I view them as small business entrepreneurs. And so in that capacity, even though I didn't grow up on a farm, I feel a direct connection to the business. And when I go visit a farm, I feel like I understand.
Yeah.
You had another question?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. My second question is, FBN has really been good. Dad and I have been with you guys since almost the beginning, have been really good at disrupting markets. So the biggest question always in my mind is, what's the next market to disrupt? So I'll leave you with that.
Right now there is a focus. This is another thing that's just tactical. There is a focus on trying to make everything we do right now better. So there are going to be some new things. You're going to see new things, but the pace of like some new market that we get into or other things, that'll be a little bit slower. Like, you won't see those cycles be quite as fast. Like you remember, if you've been with us that long, you probably know every 6 months you probably heard something new. It might be every 18 months now, right? I mean, and there's going to be new stuff. But you can see we got to do a better and better job for our customers. And whether that's our delivery, we've invested tons of money in delivery experience, financing, technology for FBN Direct, financing, and our application process for financial. I want the team to continuously improve that, right? So if I take their mental bandwidth away onto something new, it's harder to do. So I think given where we are right now, I think there will be some new stuff. We're looking at various sectors, the equipment sector, we're looking at geographies, we're looking at a lot of things. And so you can expect there will be new stuff, just the rate of it and the frequency of it will probably be a little different than the past.
Yeah, we want to be great. We want to be great at the things we do. think I see Brad Carlson.
Yeah.
Hi, Brad.
Wow, you remembered my name. That's pretty good. First off, I'd like to compliment both of you on, number one, your vision that you had when you started this company. I think a lot of farmers in this room really appreciate that for once maybe we get to be put first, or at least we're not on the bottom of the pile. Second, I'd like to congratulate you on all your employees. I'm blown away every time. I've not met a bad FBN employee. There was some turnover at times, but everybody has just been excellent. I guess going forward, my question is what do you see? Last night in the talk, it sounds like fertilizer is going to be a problem for us a while. Is there any way that FBN can help us with that fertilizer issue?
Yeah.
I wish there was more we could do on that front. You know, the problem with fertilizer is the primary cost component of a lot of it is energy. It's mined, it's very capital intensive, and we're a technology company. And unfortunately, it's not a monopoly, but it's kind of an oligopoly type industry. And so our ability to intervene when all of those characteristics exist is pretty hard, right? It's easier for us to do in things like chem. It's hard to do in seed, but we can do it. We can do it in livestock. We can do it in financing. But we're looking at that. I mean, to the previous question about new things, we're looking at what are the things we can do. And if we can partner with people, partner with somebody who has those assets or has that access, then there's a lot we can do. I would love to bring a solution. I think fertilizer is a big encumbrance upon farmers, and it's a big capital sink, right? And so the less of it we can use to get the same yield, the better off we're going to be. There may be also tools we can put in that on the forefront on that front, right? How can we use less? How can we be more efficient?
Yeah, I think that's where our focus is on the biologicals program. How can you improve the bioavailability, the nutrient availability of the dollars you are putting in? How can we improve product testing through the FBN network? And how can we improve the ability for us to bring innovative products to you through the IRL program, which is the Innovators Research League, which many of you are participating in. You know, one of the things that you noticed when we got into selling products and getting products into the system is ag fundamentally breaks down at the distribution level. There's so much control in the distribution, the retail channel, the distribution to retail to get to you that many companies, there's hundreds of innovative companies, cannot access the market. They get blocked. Generics were getting blocked. These were a lot of the battles we had to fight to be able to bring these products to market in the face of enormous collusion, enormous interference from the industry to stop FBN. Over the years, you followed the Canadian competition case and some of the others we unfortunately can't talk about, but there's been many. And a lot of what we want to do is be able to bring more innovation and have a channel that is able to bring the world of innovation that exists in biotech and other areas to you, and especially in this area. And there's a lot of interesting work getting done by some of the companies that were out here that we want to bring out through FBN Direct and through the testing program. So I would just put a plug for that.
Another question?
Why don't we go all the way over here?
Thank you. Dennis Feeser from Missouri, first-time attendee. I would echo the comments of the last gentleman. I've been very impressed with staff and with everything I've seen and heard here. And listening to other people that have been with you for several years, it seems that everyone has marveled at the growth of the company and everything that you're into. And some of them, I think, thinking out loud that maybe you've grown too fast. So the question is, are you comfortable with what you're doing at the rate of growth, and is the future pedal to the metal, or are you going to slow down a little?
That's a great question. Look, when you get to a certain size, there's just a law of big numbers. So you will slow down no matter what. Like, there's nothing you can do. And that happens to every company. And to your point, I heard the comments about our employees. I wanted to talk about that. The number one thing that would tell me that we're going too fast is if we didn't get that feedback. If we started hearing like, oh, you know what, I was surprised how little some of the employees knew, or I got treated poorly, or this happened. The one thing I have to say, as big as we've gotten, we're almost 1,000 employees, is I know how our employees are trained, how they think, the rigor we put in hiring, right, as we grow our staff, and that quality has remained. If you grow so fast that it doesn't, and it's not having that impact, then you've got a problem. The law of big numbers, though, is going to take over. It absolutely has to, and that will mean less growth. It will mean less growth of headcount. It will mean less growth just in general. It can't continue at the same rate. And I think that's probably a good thing, right? To be able to digest some of the growth and, think about what's next. To the first question about, are we going to roll out 15 new things? Probably not, right? Trying to make the things we have better and better and better. That is going to be a lot of the focus. Well, it's a really good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, Roger.
Roger.
Amol, Charles, I remember like 2014, maybe, somewhere in there. And we heard about this company starting, and I think my youngest son reminded them all that you were in the basement of top producers.
Yeah.
And there's like 3 people in the room, and you're giving this great presentation. Now you have your own, your own show here. But how do you go about, because you guys have always been very convicted to your principles. How did you get through the minefield of continuing to take investment without collapsing on your core values? Because I think a lot of companies that are startups have to take, like, okay, to get this, I got to give this. And you guys just didn't seem like you gave. So how do you manage to do that? And I'm really proud of you guys for not doing that, because I was really worried that these 2 young kids that I saw, means I'm a lot older than you, I didn't know if they could do it, but congratulations.
Not that
We're
young.
a lot older now.
He's young. It's a great question. That is, admittedly, that's a struggle. I mean, to be honest, and it goes back to something I said before, which is that you cannot, if you're going to take a long-term view and you're going to make a commitment and say, I'm going to try to build a big business, or I'm going to do right by my customer, and I'm going to stick to my convictions about things like what we talked about, the global food system, other things like that, there are investors who are going to try to bully you out of those views. It happens all the time. Right. Okay, it happens as a private company, it happens as a public company. And if you don't have the courage to stand up to that, if you don't have the courage to deal with it, then you shouldn't be in the seat. And sometimes it takes standing up and saying, you know what, if you don't believe in it, then replace me. Then change the way that we do this and see if that works better, if you think that's in the best interest of everybody. But the truth is that conviction means staying the course, right? It means saying, I understand what my core principles are, I'm going to stick with them, and even if I got to take some heat, I'm going to stay the course on this thing. And that, is really, really important, because there's no way to avoid it. There's literally no way to avoid it. I used to think that you could, but you can't. And over time, you're going to be faced with those. In one way or another, you get faced with those challenges. So that's what it really boils down to, right, is are you ready to stand your ground? Are you ready to be certain and have conviction about what you said, what you're planning to do? I know we do. We do, right? It doesn't mean, Roger, I'll tell you, it doesn't mean it'll always work, right? But at least my customers, employees and others, they know where I'm coming from on it. And that's not going to change.
One of the things I would just add to that, it's in the business. It's also conviction in the markets. And
absolutely,
some of the story we haven't told as much as some of the behind the scenes that has happened, to FBN. So Canada, for example, you can read about this. It's in the Wall Street Journal. A lot of this got made public through the Canadian Competition Bureau's filings. But we went to Canada, faced enormous interference to the business. It's all public in the Wall Street Journal case. And had to really say, hey, can we go through this level of battle with the industry to be able to even be in the Canadian market? We got ganged up on, and bad things happened to our ability to supply our producers. We stuck with it. We battled through it. I went up to Yorkton when we had lost the supply of the acquisition we had made. We'd been cut off by 6 major companies, and we had some angry farmers.
And by the way, we had investors at that time, Roger, to your question, who were telling us to give up on Canada. They were like, well, we're taking losses. Why would we continue with that? I mean, Canada is a thriving business now for FBN.
Right.
I mean, we have as bigger market share in Canada than we do in the U.S. right now, and we were nearly pummeled out of business or bullied out of business by competitors in the market. But, it's a conviction. We looked at that, we reviewed it, and we said, no, we can be a winner in this market, and it doesn't matter that we got a setback here. We got to stick with the program. And that was part of it. Now, sometimes you gotta know when you're licked. I mean, you can get beat down and you can't be irrational. But if you know it's the right thing to stay the course, then you got to do it. I got two more questions. We should get
Why
them.
don't we go to Danny Gardner?
Yeah.
Thanks for putting on a great meeting, as usual, guys. Thank you. So you've laid out a number of heuristics or frameworks for making good decisions, doing hard things, sticking to your core principles. Could you please elaborate on how you ensure, how you think through and make sure you're making the highest quality decisions possible?
Yeah, decision making, I think really is about Occam's razor in the sense that simplicity usually wins out. And the waffling, indecisiveness, uncertainty, those are the enemy of good decision making. There are times where you make a bad decision, but you made a decision and it still works out. Okay? But you don't make a decision, nothing can happen. All you do is kick the can, you roll forward, and what happens is the problem compounds, whatever it is. Right? I would say that so the number one thing is simplicity. But number two thing is input. I think it's a very bad idea for anybody who has to make a decision to go off in a corner and basically say, well, I'm going to emerge in 5 days and tell you what my decision is. I mean, that's an awful idea. And if you have great people around you, like for me, I'm fortunate with my team and our employees and everybody, then you better be listening and soliciting their input on it. Because that will help you gain that conviction. Now, you got to dwell on it, and a lot of times you're going to disagree with what they tell you instinctually or what people are telling you. But if you take in the totality of the information and you say, okay, now I've given this time on balance, how do I feel? You'll get to the right answer. So that's the number one thing is I think you have to commit to being decisive, number one, in making a decision. You'd be shocked how many times you tell people make a decision and they don't. They think they did. Think they made a decision, but they didn't. And then the second is you got to have the right inputs. In a vacuum, I mean, if you're like the genius in the room who's going to go off and figure it out, then I don't know. I mean, it's just a roll of the dice. Right? That's how I do it. One more?
Yeah, maybe one more question over here.
Davis Bailey from Nebraska. I'd like to ask two questions and allow you to answer whichever one you'd rather talk about. Starting a company is one thing, but you're building an everything company. The vast array of services and products that you offer, I would call that an everything type company. So how do you go about that? The other question would be, how do you go about building trust and authenticity with a customer segment that you didn't grow up in necessarily?
I'll answer the second one. I think that's a tougher question. I don't think you have to be from the exact same background as somebody to have empathy, right? And to understand what the business is like. What you have to have is interest in it. And like genuine interest, not BS interest like I want to build a company in this segment, so let me go like try to pretend like I'm interested, right? Real interest in it. And from my perspective, when I look at authenticity, sometimes when I think of people who are from a segment, right? Things that they've known their whole life or whatever, sometimes it's harder to disrupt that or harder to think outside of the box because on the one hand, I do have an emotional attachment to our farmer customers. I want them to be successful. I want the farmers who join FBN to be the most profitable, the most prosperous, and everything else. I would love for that to be the case, right? So there's an emotional attachment, but it's not the same as if you grew up on a farm and 5 generations and all that stuff, right? Which most of our customers are in that position. So in a way, it's part of building the trust is convincing a partner, a business partner, a customer, whatever it is, that your view is objective. And whatever that view is, we're trying to think of it in the best interest based on the information we see here today. And I think that's the approach we've taken, right? We're not trying to tell you we grew up on a farm and we know everything. What we're trying to say is, look, we're taking a look at the industry, we're taking a look at what we see in the information, and we're judging what businesses can we get into that might cost you to have better income, lower cost or higher revenue, better cash flow, a better experience, a safer experience at the farm. Those are the things that I think how you build trust. And it isn't necessarily about being from the same world, right? And in fact, I find myself, I grew up in a city, my parents are immigrants from India, I find myself far more at home when I'm in rural America. I like it better there. I like being around our farmer customers So maybe it's a personality thing or whatever the case is, but I feel very in tune with the small business owner who's going through the ups and downs that a farm does. That's how I approach it. And that, if you can channel that, then that's authentic. We don't make it up. We got one more? Last one? Last question. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe the last one.
Dr. Dudley.
Steve Dudley from Minnesota. My first Farm to Farmer, it's been great. Really congratulate the team on that. We heard some speakers last night who talked about a lot of concerns. And so what would be the top 2 or 3 concerns that you're spending time on, Amol, from inflation, cost of goods, logistics? Maybe give us your perspective on
That's
the
a great
world.
question. My employees know the answer to this one. It's inflation. I think inflation is a big problem. I think that we've let it get a bit out of control, both because of some of the stimulus. I think a lot of it is related to the government spending that occurred. Right? A lot of money was printed, probably way too much, past the point. I mean, there was a time where we had to respond with what was happening with COVID, and then there was like an overage on top of that. So the government spending does print money, and it causes inflation. And then, of course, you have this issue of supply chains and things not being available. So if you don't have enough supply of something, the price of it's going to go up. That's true of labor right now. And so I think wages and labor, inflation, services inflation, these are all very, very serious issues. And here's why they're very serious. They compound. They compound, right? Deflation is not a common thing. I mean, you can have volatility in the prices, but those inflation rates compound. So let's say your rate of inflation went up 8% this year, and next year is going to be 3%. It's over 11% by the end of that period of time, the overall cost of things, right? That's a big increase in whatever it is you were purchasing before, whether that was food or whether that was energy. The number 2 thing I worry about, so inflation is number 1 by far. And I would say inflation is relative of my confidence in our government and everybody else to handle it in a way that makes sense. The second is energy. I am flabbergasted at our approach to energy. America has fossil fuels. I know what all the issues are for people with fossil fuels, but I don't know why we don't drill, why we don't try to get more supply of energy at a time where it's scarce. You have people in other parts of the world who are creating disruptions all over the place. I am fearful that not only will energy be scarce, but that the price of it will become prohibitive. And yet it's becoming harder and harder in the United States to drill or produce oil. And I don't understand that. Like, why don't we let business people be business people and let the market judge? I get the concerns about oil companies and fossil fuels, but right now we need energy. So that's probably my number 2 concern, is somewhat related to inflation, because if the cost of energy keeps going up at a rapid rate, we got a problem. And I know it's kind of been in cycles, and it's a little gasoline price a little bit better right now than it was 3 months ago. I can see a situation where it gets a lot worse again. So those are probably the number 1 and 2 biggest factors that I see in the world that I worry about. How they'll affect our business, what it'll do for us, I'm not sure. I think they could affect farm. I think they could affect consumer. I think they could affect food prices, for sure. So we got to keep our eye on that stuff.
Right. Well, with that, we do have to wrap on the time,
Yeah.
because Amol's got to unfortunately get to a plane.
Yeah.
But with that will bring Farmer to Farmer to a close. So guys, this has been just wonderful to be able to get back in person after 3 years. Depending on where you lived, you might have had space during those 3 years. And if you lived in California, like some of us, we did not have a lot of space over those 3 years. And we're traveling a ton. But this has just been tremendous for us, the FBN team. Thank you to everybody who helped put on this event. There is the work of hundreds of FBN employees, several dozen who worked incredibly difficult tasks over many, many hours, pulling this all off. There's many of them are in the back of the room, and I can see the marketing table back there, and the tech table, and Ed and the engineering team, and all the teams who helped us set this up. There's more people to thank than I will be able to remember, and so I don't...
Yeah, please, we don't deserve... Charles deserves some credit for this show. I don't deserve any credit. Like I said, you guys have seen me mill. I just mill around the show and talk to people, okay? But the effort that goes into it, spectacular. I appreciate that. And the effort from our farmer members to come here and spend 3 whole days with us, just very appreciative.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, and we will continue to be bringing Farmer to Farmer, and we want to make it better and better. So please, there is a poll actually about Farmer to Farmer in community. Please put your comments in there. We want the feedback, and the dates on next year are December 12th through the 14th. Mark them on your calendar. We'll be right back here in Omaha, December 12th through the 14th, and I hope to see you before then at an FBN event, a community builder event, a marketing event, a grain seminar, a seed event. There's going to be a lot of them, so we hope to see you. And thank you so much for spending your time, and have a great holidays. And we will see you in the new year. Thank you.